What's life like at Obsidian these days? What's happening in this
What's
place?
happening? It's the same but different, I guess is probably the best way to say it. I mean, when we got into business 15 years ago to make games, it was about making role-playing games and make big role-playing games. And a lot of that was, starting with KOTOR 2. And it's been hard sometimes, and the industry has changed a lot. So there was this constant pressure of like, how do we continue to do that? Like, how do we do that as an independent studio? And so that's what we're doing, is we're doing that. So that's what we're doing with the Outer Worlds and the other games that we're not talking about yet. But because that was so hard and that, so we had, we're trying to come up with a different way of making it possible, and that's really where the Microsoft thing has come in. So it's different from the standpoint of now Microsoft, we're part of Microsoft and they're supporting us in everything we're doing. And that's allowing us to do the same, which is to continue making these, these great RPG adventures.
Was there the threat that you wouldn't get to keep doing the same? And it was a matter of, we should go with this because we need it?
Yeah, I think as a company, we had to make a decision, right? And so, and I hate to say it's all about money, but it is a little bit when you're running a business, it's all about money. And so we have, 160, 170 people, and, we're thinking about this in, early 2018 about where do we go and how do we do this? Like, if we want $50 million to go make the next big game, or 60 million or 80 million or 40 million or whatever the number is to make the next big game, where do we get it? And you can go to publishers, and we've talked to a lot of publishers about all the, through the years about it. But it's harder and harder as an independent developer. There's fewer and fewer of us. I guess now one less. And so a part of it, we really had to think about, do we change the company? Do we not try to make these big RPGs? Do we just do whatever we can to get a publisher to fund us, which we thought was really hard? Do we go and get investment from a company? Or do we look at getting acquired? And we started the year not really knowing which way it would go. We would just sort of like look at all of those things. And of course, it ended up where we went with an acquisition with Microsoft. But it was really to be able to do what we set out, 15 and a half years ago to do.
What do you think Microsoft saw in you guys?
So, I mean, I can just sort of say what they told us and what they saw in us is they saw a business that had been going on for 15 years and survived the ups and downs and stayed true to kind of what we've done, which is we make inclusive, agency-driven RPGs for people to play. And we sometimes do licensed stuff and sometimes we do original stuff. And I think they like that continuity of it's us, and from the standpoint of we could keep a business running. And that we were very specialized. In other words, that there wasn't a question mark about what we as a company do. We make RPGs and we make these kind of RPGs. And so that, I think, when they were looking at their portfolio, and not, as Matt Booty has said, he's not trying to say, hey, slot, but they want to provide a whole sort of like circle of experiences for people on Game Pass. And RPGs should be a part of that. And I think that's kind of what led them to talk to us.
Do you think they're interested in the CRPG trend you guys have been on for a while, or are they more thinking like, hey, Fallout New Vegas developers, we didn't have them?
Well, no, I think what a lot of it is they're looking at, they want to have good games. That's the end. That's really in the end of it. And if those games fill out a portfolio, that's cool too. But a lot of it really is they wanted these exclusives for people to be able to play on their platforms and in their services. And so go find the developers that they're not worried about going out of business the next day, and who have an identity and have a culture and have a group of people that have worked for them for a long time. As Matt also said, there's not necessarily a checklist, but it's sort of like if you were to go out and, and look to buy a studio. You're going to go, well, this is the same people been running it. Have they generally been profitable? Have they made cool games? Kind of, what's their Metacritic? All these kind of things. And so luckily as a studio in a lot of ways, we check a lot of boxes on the non-existent checklist.
Right, I got it. Are you hell-bent on new IP? Do you see this as a great opportunity to have Microsoft's backing to do something new?
Yes and no. I'm still a big believer, and I just like us to go play in worlds. And if it's a world that we created, awesome. If it's a world that someone else created, that's awesome too. I've enjoyed as much making Pillars of Eternity as I enjoyed making South Park, as Fallout New Vegas and Alpha Protocol. For me, it's about the making of the game and providing that person that experience. Like for me, I look at what we do as providing an escape. People's lives are hard, right? And if we can provide an experience for $20 or $40 or $60 or whatever it is, and they can escape in something that we've created, I don't need that to be something that we made ourselves. The game, yes, but not the IP. Because I've had as much fun in a licensed game as I've had a good licensed game, as I have had an original IP as well.
So 3 different teams within the studio these days?
3-ish, yeah. I mean, so we have the Outer Worlds team, which is a majority of our development. We still have a small group of people that are finishing up in Pillars of Eternity, and then we have 2 other teams that are starting things up.
Was the Microsoft purchase and the Outer Worlds game development, was it a complicated issue to have Outer Worlds so far along before the Microsoft thing came around?
I don't know if it was complicated. I think a lot of it is that it was not, I don't want to say even it's a victim of its own success, but the game's looking awesome, and it's Tim and Leonard behind it, and it's sort of like absolutely in our wheelhouse is the kind of thing that we make. And so I think it provided opportunities, for everybody involved to sort of say, hey, where else can this game go? And so what I'm particularly excited about, which would probably have never happened otherwise, was now we have both Take-Two and Microsoft interested in seeing the game be successful. And so that to me is, when we were first talking about that, that's sort of what kind of came up as like some of the team, Tim and Leonard, were bringing it up as well. And so that's kind of the cool aspect of that, of sort of having that availability, which wouldn't have been normal. I mean, yeah, you can have sometimes work with a third-party publisher like Take-Two, and then it can be kind of a showcase title with Sony or Microsoft. But this is now where you have two groups very interested in seeing the game succeed.
So Microsoft is hands-off, but they're just, for the sake of Obsidian's pedigree, they want it to succeed?
Well, absolutely, of course, because they want us to be happy, because then that team can then go be successful on future games as well. I mean, it's the same for me. I mean, the interesting thing about the acquisition in certain ways is that I'll get to work on games a bit more. I think a lot of us that have run independent studios over the last 4 or 5 years, so much of your time is business. I mean, so much of your time. And you can have a business person, but still so much of your time is pitching and medical insurance and payroll taxes and all this kind of stuff. And so being able to now focus more on the games is, at least for me personally, is an interesting aspect of this all happening.
Can you shed any light and just explain how this would work? Would Microsoft inherently own any sequels to Outer Worlds, or how are those intertwined? Can't talk about it?
No, that's not something I can talk about. So.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
Yeah.
But it's for sure coming out on other platforms.
Oh, no. The Outer Worlds is shipping on all the platforms we've already talked about. Absolutely.
I feel like you were on the Game Informer Show podcast years ago, and we talked about why aren't more studios making games like Bethesda has made, or like you guys have made with Fallout New Vegas.
Yeah.
And that's what's so exciting about Outer Worlds. Does it feel validating to see this response be so positive to the announcement of Outer Worlds?
No, it is. I think it's funny because what games do I want to play? I'm going to play all different kind of stuff. But for me, because part of it is, I am a big RPG and ages ago D&D nerd, and I love tabletop. I love these big, meaty experiences. And those aren't made a lot. And it's not that they've ever been made a lot, but it does feel that they've been made less lately, and so if I'm sitting down, I'm sitting down to play something. When was the last big RPG experience that came out, and how many came out last year? One? Is it validating? I don't know. I think the thing is, I think from the standpoint of I think there is an absolute place for these games. I think that it is something I personally like to look forward to. Like if I hear, a Dragon Age or a Mass Effect or a Witcher, or when Cyberpunk comes out and all these things, I'm looking forward to those things because I get to go escape into this world. It provides a different kind of experience that is, I think, important to what we do.
What were those early discussions like with Tim and Leonard? What were you hoping they would achieve with this game?
It's funny because a lot of times when we talk about when we're starting games, we're kind of just throwing stuff around and trying to figure out what makes sense. And I think the very early days was even actually before Tim and Leonard, because we were talking about, okay, we want to go off and make another IP. We want to own that IP. And so what is it that we want to own, right? And so we thought about it as, okay, well, sci-fi, and at the time, I think Andromeda was coming out pretty soon. And so we were like, and sometimes you look at sci-fi in our industry, and for some reason, sci-fi pushes Hollywood blockbusters, but sci-fi can be pretty hit or miss when it comes to big games. Obviously, Destiny does well in Mass Effect, but we were a little bit concerned about in which direction would we go. So then we kind of talked about, and what I mean by sci-fi there, I mean the very kind of clean, super technology Star Trek-like sci-fi. And so we then thought, okay, so then we were thinking post-apocalyptic, but we can't just go and do Fallout again. I mean, that's silly. So we're like, okay, well, if you took sci-fi and you took Fallout and you kind of did this, and then that's where kind of came the idea of Firefly, and said, so that became the original pitch. of Fallout meets Firefly. And then that is when we first started talking to publishers. And it was kind of in that period of time where Tim kind of came and said he wanted to be a game director again. And then it was a few months later that, Leonard was sort of like, it came that Leonard was looking to leave Blizzard. And so when we talked about that, they inherently, Tim and Leonard love the post-apocalyptic, pre-apocalyptic. They love that apocalyptic. I don't know. They love this thing of where it's kind of dirty and it's and there's power, there's power imbalance, and they like that world and then making it silly, which is Tim's part of it. That's what I think attracted them to the original thing that we were talking about, because I was certainly cool with them taking it in the direction, taking that nugget to start and then pushing it into their direction.
From your perspective, how does the development of the Outer Worlds feel for the studio? What does it mean to have a game like that in the studio?
Well, to repeat myself, it's why we started the company. We started the company to make games like The Outer Worlds, because that's what we had started doing at Black Isle Studios at Interplay, and we wanted to keep on doing that. I mean, that's why we left actually Interplay and why we left Black Isle Studios. I didn't want to leave Fallout. I didn't want to leave the place where I'd kind of grown up in the industry. And so, but we did it because we wanted to continue to make these things. And The Outer Worlds really is the culmination of that, of like creating our own IP, and getting to make this thing, which I guess, not to keep on using the word validated, but has been validated by the reaction, which is way more. It always seems like, oh, you don't believe in your own stuff. Well, of course you believe in your own stuff, but then there's things like, when we did the Pillars of Eternity Kickstarter, we had no idea we were going to make $4 million. So a lot of it is like you put something together that you think makes sense, and then you throw it out there, and I think when it feels true, or it feels authentic, when it is something you yourself truly believe in and want to make. And I think that's what's happened with The Outer Worlds. I really like where it's going. Of course, we're not done yet. The last months of an RPG are always a big pain in the ass, but all games have lots of moving parts. But the best way I can often talk about an RPG, it is very much, the story is very important, the characters are very important, but it's also so much it's a sum of its parts. And so you have to have all the parts working together, and it takes a long time to get it there. So, but in general, like, we're feeling good about combat and and character development, and the characters are cool, and the world is cool, and the corporations that Tim and Leonard and the group have come up with are fun. It feels like a world that people will want to become a part of. And it's not just some generic, here's a place with, swords and dragons, or, a bomb shelter, or, or a spaceship, right? It has a unique identity itself that people will want to become a part of. I think the thing that I like so much about it as well is it's creating this world that we will get to go play in for years. Because I guess that's how I always think of it. I always think of, like, I'm an old school sci-fi fantasy reader, so everything's a trilogy, or everything is like books and books and books, although the whole Robert Jordan thing is insane, right? But that's what I like about it, is we're building this game world, or this setting that we can go now tell all different kinds of stories in. And it lives up to that. It's that dense, it's that built, it's that has these cool characters in it. It's like thinking about like a D&D campaign from the standpoint of, like, this is B1, and then there's going to be B2 and B3 and B4 and so forth and so on.